American movie, she said that he left me, but this time, you know, it was very obvious without thinking, you know, when he actually, you know, what just dumped her. He actually decided to break up with her. I really actually gave hundreds of thousands of different examples whenever there is, you know, even actually watching a French movie. Oh, you know, he left her, you know, because he felt, you know, he was no longer in love with her. Oh, maybe that was a good for both of us. I said immediately, every single time. Why would you actually dismiss, you know, hundreds of thousands of different cases that I have already proven if there's any type of unique usage, like, you know, the till, you know, any, what's that, the controller and the captain at the till who's been, it's really similar, this expression, like the man in charge, the man in the saddle, or a man who is at the switch, you know, who is at the helm. I'm not really so sure if those attackers of me would actually be knowing this, at the helm or at the switch, who has in power, who is in charge of the situation, who somehow dismisses all the responsibility coming from one's work. So, you know what, David Kurgan actually used an expression related to teal. Somebody who's been in charge of the teal, making the actual control of the direction of the vessel. Vessel is definitely the state, alright? I've already explained so many different things, just like the rest of people had no difficulty. That's the real reason I want to actually jump in and watch this kind of thingy and explain it. Let's try to actually listen to it. 그래, 이걸로 하지. 또 다른 expression 있으면 얘기해 줄게요. To me, it's really easy. 이런 말은 처음 들어보지만, left는. Yeah, I don't mind. To me, it's really easy. John Berman's English is very, very easy. Because that's how my professors...
Thank you very much. We want to remember some of the more than 545,000 Americans lost to coronavirus. 75-year-old Dennis.
So, you know, we want to actually we want to actually remember them. Means we want to commemorate all these, you know, people consumed by the coronavirus. Those are the victims of the coronavirus. Those are the people who just passed away because of the coronavirus. Lost to coronavirus means, you know what, those are, it's a very common expression. Those are lives, you know, lost to, or, you know what, fallen prey to the coronavirus. That means that those are lives, they died. They died of the COVID-19. So I have to think about it. We want to actually, you know, pay tribute to those are lives of fallen victim, fallen prey to the coronavirus. Their lives were consumed by the coronavirus. They were just actually, you know, brought to death because of the coronavirus. It's really the lost to. That means that they, you know, they are lost to. Yeah, it's really omitted. Those are lives lost to coronavirus. You know, this be verb is really omitted. It's very obvious, right? I don't really need to think. I think you're greatly mistaken about the choices. This is a live television. I have no control over this. Just say something. Whenever, you know what, I will actually wait until, you know, John Berman or Alice Camerata actually, you know, were to say something unique or something that might be somewhat unknown to non-Americans, okay? Because if there is any type of idiomatic expressions, I'm going to give you an immediate explanation. That's really why I'm actually up to this, okay? I just really feel very uncomfortable. Excuse me, you know, 1 out of 1,000 would be just purely caused by misclicking. And I'm so sorry, I really have a weakness in terms of understanding foreigners' words. I should have listened to, you know, the very first syllable of hers. Today is a very sad day for me. I said he left to me, but I really couldn't imagine that was a really kind of the incident because I was thinking about something else either, and I wasn't really not known to her French either. Technically, before she said "il est sorti," I didn't even have to realize she was speaking in French. Yeah, John Berman has a very standardized on here.
That's why there's Otezla. Otezla is not a cream. It's a pill that treats plaque psoriasis differently. With Otezla, 75% clear skin is achievable. Don't use if you're allergic to Otezla. It may cause severe diarrhea, nausea, or vomiting. Otezla is associated with an increased risk of depression. Tell your doctor if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts, or if these feelings develop. Some people taking Otezla reported weight loss. Your doctor should monitor your weight and may stop treatment. Upper respiratory...
So Otezla is our arthritic psoriasis in a drug. You know what? A little introduction for a big moment. That means a little moment for a big introduction. If you really actually, meet your in-laws for the first time, this is a very, very antsy-pantsy moment, right? So, if you really have a sororosis, that means you cannot actually, have your hug, or you can never actually have a touchy-feely share with other people. Why? Sororosis, especially arthritis sororosis, is very painful. Tesla is really for these kind of people. If you actually have this, a boost, it's a little moment, tiny little feely moment for the big introduction. So you are actually accepted as a new member of the family, but this, tiny little break can actually change the rest of your lifetime, right? But don't be afraid of actually, going out. I mean, going after them, not really going for them. I want to say going for them, or, don't actually hesitate. Don't pull yourself back into, a snail's horn, or you don't really need to actually, you don't really need to bring yourself back into your snail's house, right? But the thing is, if you ever actually listen to a Tesla, would it be bad for depression? If you had a history of your depression, you need to actually contact your doctor, because a Tesla has been scientifically proven to worsen the condition of the depression. And also, it has been actually, it could eventually induce more of action related to vomiting or high blood pressure, or even diabetes, or nausea, or discomfort, or excited bowel movement, right? So, some people actually who used Tesla before, they also notified a certain weight loss. If you do not really want to use your weight, if you actually do not really have a disturbed metabolism, you also need to contact your doctor. High blood pressure, or vomiting, or nausea, or stroke, and chest pain, and also discomfort and bowel movement, and different symptoms are really being reported. So you'd better actually have a consultation with your doctor before you ever use a Tesla as your arthritis sororosis drug. So, what does that mean? A little moment for a big introduction. Here, a little moment is a little, human interaction. You actually shake your hands. You actually, have your elbows. I mean, you don't really want to abuse this, for raises. You actually rub your shoulders, and you actually, rub your elbows, rub your shoulders. It means you just actually share moments together by having your flesh and spirit conjoined with them. That means you just actually have a chit-chat, you just share space, you just breathe in the same air. You somehow actually, meet your in-laws for the first time. You actually, somehow brought yourself into a new household which could be your own, right? Think about it. You meet your fiance's family for the first time. How exciting that might be, right? You're actually meeting new family, which it could be yours and for the rest of your life, in the future. I mean, I don't really like this kind of disturbance coming from my neighborhood, which is really annoying to me. Sometimes I don't really know what else I can actually say about it because of their disturbance. They're very interruptive, to tell the truth. Because whenever they are pounding on the floor, I just really like to kill them, because they're really annoying and sickening people who have nothing else to do. Maybe they're really unemployed, they're receiving social benefits, just simply because they were up to abusing their power, or, harassing me. Otherwise, why in the first place they would have created this much noise? I really wish I could actually leave free of this kind of annoyance. It's really irritating and grating on my nerves. It's sometimes nerve-wracking. That's really it. But a little moment for a big introduction means that this is a huge introduction. You're actually meeting your family, which could be yours for the rest of your life, right? You're being wedded into the family too, right? The marriage is not just actually a union between one individual with another, or it's not really a union between one man and one woman, or one man and one man, or one man and one woman, or one woman and one woman, like this, right? It's because you sometimes accept the conventions and traditions of a certain family. So sometimes, people say the marriage, you're actually being wedded into a family, because, marriage, it can be the union between two different families, right? You need to actually, get to know your in-laws, and your spouse also needs to know your family too, right? This type of interaction. A a little moment for a big introduction. Little moment is a tiny, chitty-chatty moment, or a little touchy-feely interactions. This could actually be, very much important, because it could be a great icebreaker. It could eventually set the tone for your future relationship with your in-laws. So it's a very important moment, right? But, tiny moment, having a meal together, or even actually talking about your past or sharing your ideas with them. These could be, right, carefree, and this should never be bothered by your medical conditions, right? If you have arthritis or psoriasis, you cannot hug anyone. You cannot even shake your hands with other people. Yeah, you cannot actually shake hands with other people because, touching your body would be very painful, especially arthritis or psoriasis, because joints and, joints and articulates, those areas are going to be very much swollen or painful because of the symptoms. So you should stay away from them. Or you should actually, back them off before they would even hug you, or before they embrace you. And this kind of, interaction would be almost impossible. So if you ever actually use that, then this would be very helpful. But the problem is, there are non-cases about depression. If you had a depression history, you should stay away from Otezla. Because Otezla could exacerbate your conditions by changing more of a mood conditions, so you could feel more depressive. And these kind of non-cases were scientifically proven. There is a precautious warning for you in case you might actually have had the symptoms before. Well, let me actually watch more of it.
I miss him, she later told me. Can you tell me some of what you're feeling? I don't have my mom with me right now. I don't have my dad either. I just want to be reunited with them, she told me. Off camera, her grandmother overcome by grief. As I asked about her mother and if she'd been sent to a camp, how long was she away for? She quickly bolted to her grandfather, translating our question from Chinese to Uyghur for them. Camps are too sensitive a topic to discuss.
This is a really interesting situation right now. Basically, when this young lady was asked about her feelings, she said that she really couldn't actually wait to see her mother again, because she felt, she felt devastated. She was in grief right now. It's really sad, and she's really grieving the fact that her mother and even her father were taken away from her, because, her both parents were separately, detained in the camp, because they're from Uyghur. I didn't really watch the entirety, so I don't really want to make any presumptuous assumption. But the thing is, it's very clear she's in deep sadness. She couldn't actually, imagine how her life would be falling apart in this way, because her both parents were not available in her life anymore. So when, the CNN's reporter David Colbert asked question about this, that means, when was the time her parents were taken away? When was the time her parents were captured in the camp? This detention camp. Then she abruptly bolted. That means she quickly made her move to her grandfather, as if she was really in need of talking to him immediately. So, she whispered a certain word into him. That was, assumed by, David Colbert. She was actually, really seeking a permission. She was asking a question, whether she could answer this one. So she actually made an interpretation of this English question into different language, English or Chinese question into a different language that could be understandable from the perspective of her grandfather. You get that? No, don't fucking try to actually make this loud noise. I don't really understand. I'm really perfectly good enough to understand this one. The situation is like this. I just really don't need any type of contextual understanding. You know, I can understand the situation better in English. You know, if I ever actually watch this in the middle of a Korean program, I have to actually bag many different questions from my parents. But the situation is, you know, I don't really know whether they were Uyghur or someone else, different tribes, I don't know. But the situation is like this. When David Colbert asked her and how she's feeling right now, she said, you know, she's so sad and she would be so devastated. She just really wants to see her parents again, especially her mother, who actually faced a similar type of circumstances, just like, you know, her father, who had been taken away earlier. And her mother is now, you know, away from her too. They were all assumed to be in the detention camp for whatever reason. But when David Colbert asked, you know, when those events took place, in the first place, when, you know, her mother was taken away from her. So, I mean, that was really the question. When was really, you know, the question itself was a quote unquote, when was really the time when your mother was detained in the camp? That was really the question. The moment actually he dropped this question, this young girl immediately, you know, rushed to her grandfather and whispered this, you know, word into his ears. Why? Because she was uncertain whether she could actually go on to say something about this to a press guy. You understand what I mean? She made an immediate interpretation from English or from Chinese to Uyghurs or certain different language that I don't know, but which is really known to her grandfather. Why? Because, you know, she was not at all certain whether she could actually go on discussing the issue with a certain person outside her family. The answer is, you know, the issue related to the political detention camp is too sensitive to be dealt with. One could even actually face charges when one would be talking about certain situation with the press. That's really the reason why she backed away, I guess. No, I don't really understand it. You know, I feel really bad, and people who really don't understand me, they would actually say something really silly. But let me actually, you know, explain this once more, because I was really annoyed by this kind of pounding. Please do not pound. Every single time I said, you know, there is a crazy guy living upstairs, they're actually making heck of a noise, which really, you know, annoys me. If you ever actually stop that one, I would never hesitate and there would be no grumbling. Everything will be clearly enunciated, so it wouldn't be audible to anybody who speaks English. I want to actually repeat my sentences because I was abruptly interrupted by this kind of harassment, which I would never expect to experience in Germany, I think. But the problem is, you know, this young lady who actually was really devastated to witness the disappearance of her parents, especially her mother, in recent days. She said that, you know, when she couldn't actually wait to see her mother again, she was in a deep grief and she was grieving the fact that her mother was taken away from her, just like her father. So, you know, David Colbert asked her, you know, when that happened. That was a question. And the very question was relevant to the detention camp. Then she immediately made a quick move without actually giving an answer to David Colbert. Why? Because she was in need of getting the authorization from her grandparent, right? Because she couldn't actually be so certain whether she could move on to discuss this kind of sensitive issue. So she made a translation. She made a quick interpretation. I don't think this is really from English to Chinese. I think, you know, it's from Chinese to Uyghur. It's, you know, they had a different language, I think. But I have never been exposed to learn the very tribe's name. I don't really know which tribe is. I guess it would be Uyghur. I actually jump in the middle of it. I don't know. This is, you know, I really like to share my screen with you in order to weed out any assumption that I've been actually watching this forevermore. I only got this much. That's not true. You know, that was the first time I've ever actually watched this segment. No repetition, no rerun. This is my first time, and I just heard this much. That's it. The actual expression used by David Colbert, a little girl, bolted means, you know, she immediately made a move. She quickly raced to her grandfather and translated the sentence posed by him, because she could not actually be so certain whether this would be okay for her to mention. sometimes there could be very political sensitive issue. The very answer from her grandpa was really simple. The detention camp is a too sensitive issue. It should never be mentioned. She could actually put herself in danger, so it would be discreet for her to drop out of it. But I assumed that would be Uyghur, but there was no mentioning of it. Now this time I will watch the entirety of it. But I understand this, and I bolted out. Bolted means you just actually know, it has a many different meaning in case you don't really understand. Bolted means, at least, 2 or 3 different main meaning. I don't really need to be so serious, but as long as there is a context you can understand it. You actually gobble up something. Do you even actually know what gobble up? You actually take in enormous amount of food really quickly. Or you just actually run out of the room. Or you just actually quickly displace yourself from somewhere else, from somewhere to another, right? Do you really think this is really difficult? Huh. She quickly raced. She made a rush to her grandfather. She just actually made a dash to her grandpa, who was just standing right across the room. Why? Because she really wanted to ask his permission, or at least, she could not make that decision alone to actually, she really wanted to seek his advice, whether that would be appropriate for her to go on talking about the circumstances. This time I will watch one full reportage, okay? Huh, it's really kind of crazy. Never seen, never heard of.
We can now see it at a level that wasn't seen before. We know China is trying to keep the world, and certainly the people in China, from seeing it. So how do you expect China to respond?
They're angry about this, and one of the things that we have seen is they point out flaws in other countries, particularly Western countries. They're saying, look at the U.S., look at Canada, look at the U.K., look at Australia, all these countries that are pointing at human rights issues here within China. Well, look within your own borders. You have your own issues. And it was interesting to see Secretary Blinken last week in Alaska address this in what I would say in a rather humble way, to say, yeah, the U.S. has a lot of issues, but we're acknowledging them. We're transparent. We're open, and we hope that transparency and openness will lead to a more perfect union, drawing a strict contrast between how the Chinese, in his opinion, are handling things. But this is also setting the stage for what will be a very interesting Olympics, to be quite honest. It's supposed to be right here in Beijing in 2022. There are already calls for a boycott based on human rights concerns and allegations of the widespread abuse. But then it also could be a platform for many athletes of Western countries to use that to push for human rights and really a recognition of what people are going through.
Okay.
So, David,
so, what he says is very easy. So there are lots of mentioning about the human rights issue, especially concerning the Uyghurs, the desperation in China, right? Why, when no one is actually mentioning, and what are the typical reactions coming from Beijing? So we are actually talking about the Synecdoche, Beijing represent the Chinese, governmental authorities, right? They're being angry, especially, the rest of the powerful Chinese throughout the society. They're actually pretty much infuriated this type of double standards from their perspective. What about your nation's conditions? You're actually only focusing on China's human devastation by actually pointing out or underscoring the Uyghur conditions. But your country, your home yards are okay. We're not so certain about that. We are actually being discriminated because we are actually gaining momentum when it comes to economic development. We're actually, being a much more weighty player in geopolitics. That's probably one of the reasons why Western countries really despise us, trying to actually suppress us by citing this type of unbelievable reason. You know what? What about, Germany? What about in the United States? Those are really the crazy people, the white supremacists. They've been actually, harassing other black lives. Think about it. The Black Lives Matter is really the condition that is actually being demonstrating. That is really what truly epitomizes the failure of the U.S. human rights. That's, Chinese official statement in a general sense, although this has never been mentioned in this system. So in response to these kind of accusations, current Secretary of State Tony, you can say that both are the same name, and Blinken said last week in Alaska, he said that, of course, you know what, there are problems associated with the U.S. civil liberties and civil rights. He would have rather respond to the circumstances in a humble way. He humbly acknowledged the actual conditions of deterioration in the United States in the face of the Black Lives or some different COVID-related conditions. He actually, you know what, gave a nod to the human rights of failure in his home ground too. He did not say, oh, the United States is perfect. No, he never said that. However, Anthony Blinken last week in Alaska, he actually said the United States is working really hard to recognize the failures across the nation, and the U.S. is also willing to open up the cases there are, revealing the weaknesses of its own system. That's what makes the U.S. so special, and that's what makes the United States of America better than China. Because eventually that makes the Union much more perfect. That means, you know, the Union is the entire system. If you really want to actually talk about the Union, all 50 states in the United States forge a governmental system. That's a really federation, right? But under the one flag of the United States. That means they belong to the same country, the Union, right? That makes what the Union much more perfect. That means recognizing certain problems existing in the system and trying to fix and repair them gradually by opening them up, being honest about them. These type of a gradual fix and repairs are the very solution to making the Union much more perfect and flawless. Even though we might actually, you know, see eye to eye on so many issues, even though we might not be on the same page, because think about it, all different states are really big enough to be one country with its own sovereignty. However, despite our differences, or despite our ideological disparities, we actually try to gather our power by recognizing our flaws and errors. And then we actually try our very best to find the possible solutions to these existing problems, instead of burying our head in the sand like an ostrich. That's what makes the United States so much better than China. I mean, he didn't really say that way last week. He said that that's at least what makes the United States of America a little bit more transparent, right? However, China is not really recognizing its own problem, but China is more like devoted. China is at this moment devoted to at least pinpointing problems existing in other countries. Just simply wanted to avoid any fault finding that might dominate the Chinese internal problem, right? But this is also very important when it comes to recognizing geopolitical influence and the upcoming global event. In 2022, there will be the Olympics, right? So there are many of the boycotts and oppositions because of the Uyghur and Hong Kong's and human rights violations, right? That's really the reason why China is trying to at least, you know, undo some of the worst damage that has ever been done to these two different groups by playing with media. You know, even though they have no intention of minimizing the pressures or onus endured by Uyghurs or even the people in Hong Kong, they had a zero interest in actually ameliorating the circumstances. That's what has been said. Yeah, all right. But it's more like, you know, setting the playground. It is more like, you know, rolling out the red carpet to accommodate the international press. Because they need to control their damage. They are really in a damage control mode. Because they really want to minimize any fallout coming from their rough-handed policy on the Uyghurs, as well as the people of Hong Kong. That's the problem, right? That's another human rights violation. They were constantly being highlighted by West journals, right? That's a problem. The Western journalism constantly focuses on this type of human rights violations and civil rights failures, right? So what if I miss it? To me, it's a very easy. I never even heard of it. And John Berman's question was like this. How, people in China are reacting to this type of criticisms raised by the Western journalism, because the Western journalists, they are actually being dispatched and deployed in China, despite all the difficulties. They just really want to feature the human devastations and hardships experienced by Uyghurs, right? That's what they were doing. In response to this coverage, Chinese in general, across the society, especially at the top level, they're being very angry. Those who have a close ties to Beijing, they're extremely alerted to witness this concentration of interest by the Western media. Why? Why would it? Because they feel they're being discriminated. Oh, you think the United States has a right to mention anything about our conditions? Think about it. I mean, I can actually honestly say that, I don't know, but can I actually mention one thing? Because I really have a great difficulty of speaking because of this pounding noise. Somebody is slamming the door. You can actually hear the sound coming from above, upstairs. Somebody, who's been living upstairs, that person has a mental history or something like that. Somebody is really slamming the door whenever I speak. I cannot actually tolerate this type of crazy work. Without this type of harassment, I can always speak better. But let me actually recapitulate what I said. When David Krobler was asked about the reactions coming from China, he actually said that people are really actually angry because they feel that they're actually being played by double standards. There are many different failures in terms of rectifying or even preserving human rights in Western countries. Especially China probably targeted the United States, right? There are outbursts of demonstrations and protests because of the Black Lives Matter and the human rights and the civil liberties of the African Americans have been failed by law enforcement, right? They were treated like second-class citizens. That's the real reason China is, pretty much proud of dealing with the United States. They think that, oh, you know what? Look at your own history. It's really like in a pot calling the cattle black. Look at this, and every eye of the world has already witnessed the outburst of failures coming out of the United States throughout 2020. Then do you really think that you're in the place to say something? Look who's talking to whom. So you're actually talking about the oppression of the Uyghur tribes in our country. Before you do that, you better watch out your own people. But in response to that, in reaction to that, indeed, there was a humble recognition made by current Secretary of State, who is in charge of the State Department as a diplomatic chief, right underneath the President Biden. Anthony Blinken actually said something very interesting last week in Alaska. This speech was allegedly conducted last week in Alaska, right? I would rather say that this speech was taking place in Alaska last week, right? Yeah. This speech took place in Alaska. I'm actually very certain about it. Alaska is another state of the United States. It's one of the 50 states. Last week. You can say that.